After you meet with an LSS staff member to register with our office and finalize your accommodations, you will be able to send your professor a copy of your accommodations letter through Clockwork. Depending on the type of accommodations you have, you may need to have a conversation with your professor about how your accommodations will be implemented. This conversation should ideally happen at the beginning of the semester or very soon after you've been approved for accommodations. As a reminder, during this conversation, you never need to mention your disability or condition. You only need to discuss your accommodations and how they will be implemented. When you have this conversation with your professor, you can decide whether you will communicate in person or via email. If you're going to communicate in person, make an appointment so that you have a few minutes of your professor's undivided attention. If you're nervous, write down a couple of points you want to make sure to address and practice what you're going to say. Sometimes this conversation is as simple as, "I am a student registered with Learning Support Services. Please review my accommodations letter on Clockwork. You will see that I will be needing some testing accommodations. How should we handle that?" Some students like to really sit down with their professors and give them some background about how they learn and what their strengths are. It is really up to the student to determine how they want to structure this conversation. We know this conversation can sometimes feel nerve-wracking or intimidating, especially if this is the first time you've had this professor. But it's important to remember that most professors are friendly and want to give you the support you need. If you ever run into a problem with a professor who is not willing to give you your accommodations or is being difficult in terms of how they will be implemented, please let someone in LSS know and we will help you work out this problem with the professor. The main thing to remember about having a conversation with your professor about your accommodations is that you are just trying to communicate effectively what your needs are and create a plan for when you will need to use your accommodations rather than waiting until the last minute when you are already stressed out and it may not be reasonable to implement the accommodations. Let's talk through the types of questions you may want to discuss with your professor when having this conversation about accommodations. If you have testing accommodations, you will need to talk to your professor about where and when you will be able to take a test and have access to your accommodations. Will your professor be able to proctor your tests and provide all of the necessary accommodations, or will you need LSS to proctor your tests? If you are taking the test with LSS, will you need to adjust when you take the exam due to class conflicts? If you have an accommodation that explains that you may need to leave the classroom unexpectedly, it would be helpful to explain to your professor how often you think this might occur and for how long you will be leaving at a specific time. It may not always be possible for you to predict this information, but if you can provide your professor with a general idea of what you will need, it will be easier for them to support you in this process. If you would like to talk through the different ways you could have a conversation with your professor regarding your accommodations, you can set up an appointment with an LSS staff member. We would be happy to help you practice this conversation or even write out the types of questions you may want or need to ask your professor.